Hello, welcome to our second podcast. Our guest today is Dennis Kowalski, the president of the Cryonics Institute, CI being one of the two leading USA cryonics organizations, been around for about half a century now, so a good long track record. It's great to have Dennis on here. We've talked about tomorrow biostasis last time, so this time let's find out about Cryonics Institute. So first of all, Dennis, if you would tell us a little bit about your background prior to becoming president of CI, which I think you've been for somewhere around 10 years or so now.
So first of all, thanks for having me, Max. And so before I got into cryonics, I grew up in the Midwest, and I right out of high school I joined the Marine Corps. I served in the reconnaissance unit as kind of our tip of the spear for the Marines. I did that for my 4 years, and then later on I got into the fire service. I was a firefighter for a major city, going on for many decades. I was also a paramedic for them. So I had a lot of experience in cardiac arrest codes, emergency medicine. And then I went on to, as I got promoted up the ladder, to teach other paramedics, both from the book in the College of Wisconsin and also in some of the community colleges, teaching other paramedics to get certified and emergency medical technicians. And so I think that kind of led a little bit into my interest in cryonics because, I was always interested in the whole kind of high energy saving of lives and that kind of stuff. And I kind of think of it, my day job was an ambulance driver and paramedic, and now my night job is kind of an ambulance driver to a future hospital.
Right, yeah, it's a very good analogy, I think. Rather than taking us from one point to another across space, going from one point in time to a future point in time. So, yeah, that's a very appropriate background. The fire you're fighting right now is people dying, so that's a pretty big emergency. So that is very appropriate and a good background. And certainly it's useful to have some background in emergency medicine and response, very relevant to cryonics. I'm curious, I'm always like to know when I'm talking to an experienced cryonicist how they came upon the idea in the first place, whether it was from meeting other cryonicists, reading science fiction, a documentary. How about you? Where did you first hear the idea?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I did enjoy science fiction and science growing up. Always interested in that. I had an uncle that mentioned that he wanted to be frozen when he passed. Unfortunately, he wasn't. But I think what really started getting me thinking about chronics was the talk shows of the '70s, the Phil Donahue talk shows, and some of these other ones. And always thought, well, this is really interesting. It makes so much more sense than just being buried or cremated.
Hmm.
But yet there was the skeptical side of me that was saying, "Oh, just how are they going to actually do this? Just everything, just a hope for the future." So I just tentatively was on board. It's better than nothing, but I didn't understand like what the promise of the future was or the blueprint. That
Hmm.
all changed when I read Eric Drexler's Engines of Creation uh, about molecular nanotechnology in the '80s, and that kind of put the hook in for me. It told me that what they're proposing isn't impossible. It actually, all these things are, you kind of see snapshots of them in nature. It's just really, really hard to reverse engineer what Mother Nature has already done.
All
And
right.
that's what actually put the hook and got me involved in cryonics.
Okay. Yeah, Drexler's book I think was very important. I know, obviously I'm more familiar with Alcor's membership numbers, but you can look back at the graph and you can see a bump up. It's actually the highest rate of growth ever was actually in the mid to late '80s after Drexler's book came out. As you said, it kind of gave some tools to understand how you might actually repair something as incredibly complex as the body. So I think it made a big difference. I'm curious, on the Donahue show, who were the guests that you remember? I think Saul Kent might have been on that, but I'm not sure who
Oh,
else.
I can't remember. All I remember is that the crowd was kind of hostile to the
Yeah.
cryonicists, and they were very kind of old school, religiously focused, and
Hmm.
it just there was just this. Oh, that's kind of weird. That's like Frankenstein. But this is a time when heart transplants and organ transplants weren't that common. So I think the audience would have had the same gut reaction. And now look at how many lives have been saved by organ transplant. It's considered routine. So people go from disbelief or it's not accepted into, oh yeah, it's, I believed in that all the time.
Mm.
Or just we'll just dismiss it and we'll move on. So
Yeah.
I think it's a similar thing with cryonics. It's just that we're not in that stage of acceptance, full acceptance yet.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it sounds like what you saw probably wasn't that sympathetic to cryonics, but it got you hooked anyway. And I think that happens a lot. There's the saying, any press is good press. I don't actually believe that. Some press can definitely be bad, but
Well, the arguments being made by the panel were really good arguments, and in
mm,
the contrast, the hostile audience was is pretty emotionally based, and
mm,
it didn't make sense to me.
yeah. So I think bad press, if it gets people interested to look it up on their own, that can help. I did a 2002 Crossfire interview with, actually it was Tucker Carlson and someone else I don't remember back at the time. When it was on CNN, and they were extremely hostile. And yet everybody I talked to said, you did great in that argument, and so a lot of people were interested despite the very negative approach of the hosts. So yeah, that can work
Sure.
out pretty well. How about your friends and family? We know that often people sign up on their own. It's nice to have the whole family signing up. But how do your family and friends feel about it? Do they think you're a weirdo? Do they hate the idea? Do they grudgingly accept it, or are they enthusiastic?
Well, that's actually a pretty tough sore spot for me. I just lost my mother
Mm.
recently. I lost my father not too long before
Oh,
that,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
and neither of them were crowd preserved. Despite my best efforts to try to talk them into that, and but nonetheless, my wife is signed up. My children are signed up. A lot of good friends are signed up. So I
Right.
don't feel like I'm going into this alone. I do have a support group of people that have bought into it enough that they've signed up themselves. So that's a big step. But I certainly wish I could have saved more of my family and friends going back.
Yeah. I don't have any of my family, obviously, apart from my wife signed up. My mother died last year, and she wasn't interested, and I couldn't. She was very open with it. She didn't hate it, but she just didn't want to do it. Yeah, that is sad. If you were just on your own, if you had no friends and family signed up with you, would you still want to do it? How would you see the future from that point of view?
Yeah. So it's funny you actually asked that question. I was asked the same question by a journalist, and it was like, I guess the question was more like, what if you're going to be all alone? You're going to be kind of like some kind of freak out of water, in some future hostile environment where they don't know you. You're primitive. You're like, and I kind of shot that question back at her, and I said, what if I had this idea? If I was on an airplane, for instance, and I had this kooky idea that sitting near the exit or wing section might give me a better chance of survival than not. And I tried to talk my friends and family in sitting in that wing section as well. And some of them went along with it, and some of them didn't. But let's say I was the only person to survive the plane crash. What would I do? Would I immediately? It'd be terrible. All right, I'd suffer the loss of all those people. I'd probably be pretty down and out. But I wouldn't kill myself. I wouldn't end my life immediately. And how many people really would? You'd get on. You'd pull up your bootstraps. Unfortunately, uh, as terrible as that would be, you'd start a new family, maybe start new friends. And we've seen similar situations where people who are in third world nations and they have no family or friends and they make it over here to the industrialized world and they thrive. Actually, they thrive because they weren't spoiled. They had it so hard and so difficult, and they're starting over, and they do good and they rebuild their lives. And so I think that is part of the optimistic, enduring spirit.
I think that's a good analogy. People who've traveled thousands of miles. I mean, I kind of did that, 6,000 miles from England to California, but obviously I wasn't. It was still part of Western civilization. So people who come over from third world countries and manage to do very well here, I think that's a pretty good analogy. And I think people often they probably don't consider the ways in which people will be integrated in the future. For instance, we had a panel discussion at the conference that you were at actually a couple of years ago, and nobody even mentioned the idea of having like a personal AI assistant that would answer all your questions about the future, which is kind of odd since we have them today. We have Alexa and Google Assistant and so on. So surely decades from now we'll have a little assistant that will answer any question that we have. So I think there'll be that. There'll probably be groups of people like you and I might get together because we're from the same era. We might have a whole kind of a you know 2000s group or 2020s group. So I think there'll be lots of ways of integrating people. Um, I think another point to make as well is that the people who do this are naturally adventurous types. So actually, yes, this might not be for everybody. There are probably some people who are so terrified of things being new and different that they wouldn't want to do it. But we're kind of self-selecting, so we're not just knowledgeable. We actually have kind of an adventurous spirit, which I think makes a big difference, obviously.
You don't see too many pessimists joining
No,
Cryonics.
no. No, if you took the general worldview of today that the world is coming to an end for whatever reason, there's always a new reason, right, every few years, you wouldn't want to do this. So a lot of people are not having children because they think the world's coming to an end. But fortunately, we knew better. Okay, let's talk about Cryonics Institute. As I said at the beginning, that's been around since, 1976, so getting on for half a century now. It's a good long time. Uh, what would you say are CI's major strengths?
Well, we're we're one of the most affordable organizations, I think, if not the most affordable. One of the largest organizations. Certainly, we have more people, whole body, suspended than any other organization. When it comes to whole body, possibly more than all the organizations combined. I'm not sure about that number. So we're doing something right. If as a nonprofit, if our goal is saving lives, we're doing something right in getting people signed up and suspended. So that's huge. Our budgets are small, but what we've done with a shoestring budget, I think, is amazing. We're great stewards of people's money. We're really good at stretching a dollar as far as we can, and I think another, a lot of it started with Robert Ettinger, his prospect for immortality. It's a great legacy to have that. He started our organization. So I think combined, all of that makes for an organization that people trust. We've often been called kind of the mom and pop operation of cryonics, but rather than that being kind of a cut, I think that is a something we embrace and we're very proud of. So, as cryonics goes, we try to keep things simple, keep it simple, stupid, focus on the low hanging fruit, and try to do the best we can with what we got.
Okay. Yeah, I have to agree. It's impressive how CI has managed to do what it's done with really very low membership dues. On that point, I have to ask because in practice, if you look at real prices, CI has actually reduced its charges over the years, right? Because they've never actually increased them. With inflation, that means that $100 today is obviously worth a lot less than $100 in the past. So in effect, you've actually reduced your dues and cryopreservation payments. Do you see
Yeah.
that continuing, or do you think eventually you're going to start raising rates a bit?
How many things actually go down in price if you think about it? I mean, especially you turn on the television, everything is going up with inflation. It's insane.
Yeah.
I think the price of a funeral when we started in '76 in the U.S. was $600.
Mhm.
Now it's averaging around $12,000, $13,000. So there was a joke that at some point we might reach parity with the funeral industry. I don't know if that'll ever happen, and I can't ever guarantee that we won't raise prices. I think we might have to at some point. Um, that being said, we've done the best we could at keeping those prices low, um, because we want to save as many lives as possible as a nonprofit. That's the ultimate goal. And so I don't know. I know that if you currently at Chronics, we reserve the right to raise prices, but we'd be very hard pressed to raise prices on someone who's prepaid. So if you
Oh
want to
yeah,
try
no,
to
you couldn't do
lock
that.
in, yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to try to lock in a price, I think that's the best way to do that. But who knows? I mean, nobody knows the future, so we don't know if we're going to have to raise prices or not.
Yeah, well, if inflation continues, eventually you may have to because
Right.
again the dollar will be worth less and less, and if you want to do more research and so on, that might be necessary. I guess it'll be the first time you do it, it's going to be a shock to the membership because they're not used to it. But if they get used to it going up a little bit every few years, that will probably people will get
Or
used to
give
the
them
idea.
advance notice to
Yeah,
sign up for and lock in, because you do really want to reward people who've been around for a long time, been paying dues,
hmm.
and been part of the organization.
Then they'll presumably want to invest that money that's been prepaid, so that if it's 20 or 30 years, obviously that money's not going to be worth as much unless you've been getting a return on it. So presumably you
Right.
would have some investment on that.
Right. We got to beat inflation with our returns.
Yeah,
That's a must.
yeah. Okay, so that was some major strengths. How about CI's biggest flaws or deficiencies, would you say, and what's being done to mitigate them?
Well, I would say our biggest flaws are kind of everyone's flaws when it comes to cryonics. Uh, you look at the ratio of people who get buried or cremated versus who actually sign up for cryonics. Yeah, CI is doing great with our numbers, but uh, you know they're dismal compared to how many people who are buried and cremated. I mean, there's people who join up for cults and real crazy,
Hmm.
terrible things, commit suicide for bad reasons, and the numbers are much higher than who sign up for chronics. I don't know why those
It's
numbers
crazy, isn't
are
it?
so dismal, and that's the biggest failure right there. Another failure is how many people I would argue in all chronics who don't have good standby. Um, and when I say good standby, I'm talking about layers of standby, not just a specialized high tech remote standby, but also layers of local standby. And that could be as small as family and friends who cooperate, who know CPR, who are willing to contact the funeral director that you've planned with ahead of time, that has ice on board and has a container and has a willingness to do maybe a little bit of CPR or administer maybe at least blood thinners or something like that, sodium citrate, heparin, just some real basics. And that is all involves relationship building. It involves hard work, a foresight to plan ahead. And if you don't do that, you know, the data is really clear. You look in the case reports of all organizations, there's failure after failure. Who is failing? Well, it's the members, but we as an organization have a duty to get that information out there to say, hey, this isn't turnkey operation. This isn't, you can't just throw money at it and you can't just hope that it's going to get done. You have to involve yourself personally. You got to wear your bracelet. You got to talk to your neighbors. And at least, I know it's difficult because some people might roll their eyes and look at you different or look at you funny, but you got to break through that. And you got to have a few people, can't be a recluse. You got to have a few people in your corner willing to go to bat for you. So, as a whole, Cryonics as a whole needs to shore up the members we have and get them some form of standby, local and remote, and show them the importance of that, of getting your ducks in a row. And,
Yeah.
and then externally, I don't know what it's going to do, what we're going to need to take, what it's going to take to get more people on board to realize that this is at least worth the opportunity or worth the chance.
Hmm. So when Robert Ettinger was cryo reserved, he lived quite near CI at that point, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he was my neighbour for a while before that, curiously. But being local, he had obviously a good fast response. I don't know what the current numbers are, but I know that for a number of years now, CI has been encouraging people to sign up with suspended animation for remote standby. What are the numbers on that right now, and do you see that percentage increasing over time?
It has been increasing, but I want people to take a holistic approach. I want them to think about um, standby locally, wherever they live. I mean, yes, we encourage people to move, but you and I know that a lot of people just aren't going to do that. They're just not going to move close to their. We know that's the best chance you're going to have. But if you don't do that, okay, then you got to set something up locally. And the numbers are increasing, they're getting better. We don't publish those numbers. Uh, we don't publish a lot of numbers that, and I know that kind of rubs people wrong. We don't publish numbers of who's funded or not funded for suspension. I could get into that. That involves a lot of why it's such a slow process. You got to bring people on board slowly and get them kind of initiate. I mean, it took me years, even though I believed in cryonics, it took me years to sign up. It's a very slow, gradual process. So I signed up, I became a member, then I got funding later. Then after I got funding, I started really thinking hard about standby. And I started building my own local standby. And I still haven't, I personally haven't signed up with SA. And I think these people are fantastic. I think ICE is fantastic. What Aaron Drake is doing, all good people. And I haven't signed up. I think I will at some point, but it's a gradual process.
Hmm.
And it's everyone has to take their own journey. And all I can do is encourage people. More is better, less is not.
Yeah, as you said, it's not just a matter of having an agreement with an organization like ICE or SA, but also doing what you can locally, letting people around you know, making sure you have your bracelet on and your wallet card, make sure your doctor knows. All that's a good idea, and that's kind of is different because those local people aren't going to have the same skills probably as the ICE or SA professionals, but there's a lot they can do in the
No,
meantime.
no. I mean, think of it. The American Heart Association has pushed CPR out to the layperson. And if there's any place in America that you'd go like to go down, I mean, there's no good place to have a cardiac arrest, but it would be Seattle. Seattle, it's taught in the public schools, in the grade school level, the high school level, in the colleges,
Mm.
in the jobs, and there's public access defibrillators everywhere. So if Bob or Joe, your brother, or your neighbor, the plumber, knows how to do CPR, and he's 5 minutes away, that's going to do you a lot better than the best cardiac surgeon 7 hours away with the best equipment. You need CPR now, and the American Heart Association has realized that, and they've pushed it out to the layperson. And I think there's something to learn from that, pushing that out to the network of lay people, and
Mm.
so that you can reach the professionals later down the line.
Right. Let's just hope they learn it from a professional, not from TV. On TV, when they give CPR, they're always doing it wrong. They're not, they kind of just kind of do it. They're not using the body weight. They kind of do it like this.
Well, it's funny you say that. I had a ER doctor tell me that bad CPR is better than no CPR. so, so that's terrible. I mean, of course, you want good CPR, right? The right amount of compressions,
Yeah.
the right depth and release and recoil. But if you're not doing any CPR, so yeah, bad CPR is better than no CPR, but good CPR is certainly better than bad CPR.
Yeah. It's also good to know the BGs, right? The staying alive, that's got the right beat for doing the compressions.
Sure,
It's a
sure.
good memory tool. Since you mentioned it, that's actually I'd like to just ask about that. So you said you don't publish certain numbers, like the number of people with arrangements for their own cryopreservation, standby numbers. Why is that? Why not put that information out there?
Because I don't think it really does any service to the. It's it's an individual thing. Whether someone's going to get standby or funding, it's going to always be an individual thing. I don't think they're going to look at the numbers and say, "Hmm, I think I need to help improve CI's numbers." I mean, it certainly is. I'm going to admit it's a problem. I would much rather see everyone funded at CI. I'd much rather see everyone have professional and local standby at CI. Maybe it's an affordability thing. Maybe some people can't afford it until the last minute, and that's terrible too because last minute planning tends to go awry. Um, I don't know. Maybe you and I are a little bit more fortunate in our financial situations to have the wherewithal to have funding in place. I'm not sure exactly why people do it or don't do it. So I don't really see how us publishing the numbers is going to change anything in that regard. And we've also kind of got some negative feedback, um, and as we've kind of been clobbered over the head for when we did publish those numbers. So I didn't think it's anything to really help the movement or the situation. Rather, I focus on individuals and trying to get them funded up and get them their own standby.
Okay. Now, certainly there are major advantages to having lower prices and lower costs. And it's good actually to have different organizations with different models, I think, so people can then choose. But one of the downsides, obviously, of not charging more than you do is that you may have not so many funds for things like CT scans. So I know it's not just Alcor now, but tomorrow Biostasis does CT scans of each of their patients to see how well perfused they are. Is that something you might do in the near future? Do you have a CT scan place with an easy driving distance? I know it's much more difficult with whole body patients unless you have an in-house scanner. So it may not be that feasible for you. Are there any plans to do scanning or any other kind of sampling, like a brain tissue or anything like that, to see
Yeah,
how well?
imaging is something we would like to do. As as imaging comes down in price, I mean, the price of a plasma television used to be $10,000. Now you can buy them at Walmart for $300, even probably bigger than the old ones.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that trend is going to continue with imaging technologies as well as they become simpler and cheaper. Um, so, we have money is an issue. It is an issue. It's always better to have more than less, but we have to be good stewards with the money we have, and we have to do the best with what we got. And one of the questions that was posed to me by uh, one of our members, one of our members was pushing for the imaging. Another member was pushing for us to not have it, and the argument was, well, what are we going to do if we have some of this negative imaging? Anyhow, do we have on staff brain surgeons that are going to rectify the situation, or would that time and effort and money be better spent on pushing the standby to be better in the first place? So I guess the difference is if we get people cooled down quicker, if we get that heparin on quicker, we won't see the occlusions and clotting that an image might show down the road. And then what are you going to do to mitigate it once it's already happened? When the clog is already there, or the ruptured vascular system's already ruptured because of too much warm ischemia, we're kind of already, it's kind of like getting a diagnosis where there is no cure. So, but that doesn't mean that more information is not better than less information. It just comes at a price. And when the affordability does come into place, I think CI will push to have that type of imaging.
Mm. There are a couple of benefits that you can get. You say, well, you've already done the patient, so there's not much you can do to revise that. But there are a couple of things you can do. If you have a CT scanner in-house, you can do a CT scan actually before you do the surgery, which can be quite handy because some people have weird blood vessels or diverge at odd points, or they may have had heart surgery. Like I remember one case where we opened up this guy's chest and it all kind of came apart because he had wires in there and it was just a disaster. And if we'd known that beforehand with the scan, we would have bypassed that and done something differently. But I think you could also look at the results. People have had standbys versus not, or how long the standby's been, how long the ischemia is, and see what the results are. So I think it does give some useful, actionable information. But as you say, you have to choose your priorities with limited resources.
Right.
So since we've been talking about standby, let me ask you about the new check-in alarm app that CI has been developing. Obviously, one of the things you can do, apart from talking to your neighbors and your doctor and letting people know, is to have some way of actually alerting the cryonics organization if you're in trouble. So could you tell us about your app and maybe future plans?
So our app is not really a new thing. It's old technology that we're just piggybacking off of and using. It's a simple alarm that you might have on a smartphone, and the alarm uh, kind of wakes you up or nudges you and says, "Hey, um, I'm going off. Are you okay?" And your job is to swipe the button that says, "Yes, I'm okay." And if you don't, the alarm's gonna get louder and more obnoxious. And if that alarm fails, that after that, then it might send out some text messages to your friends and family or neighbor that says, "Hey, check on Bob, see if he's all right, see if he's breathing, or so forth." And then they can escalate it to 911 and emergency services. So you're not just left, to die in your bed or die in the woods or whatever. And also, it's got a GPS built into it, so it shows your last location. So at least people know where to check on you at as well. And these are all simple things that exist within the app market already. So we didn't really want to reinvent the wheel. We're constantly not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to take and choose technologies that already exist out there and use them to our best efforts. What's the holy grail of cryonics is to have a pulse detecting watch or something like that. It
No.
detects the moment that you go into cardiac arrest. I can say that, yeah, that would be awesome, and I hope that will happen eventually. I think that's going to involve a lot more improvements in battery technology and better sense detection, and also kind of a negative fraudulent detection as well. I used to use, when I was a paramedic, a $40,000 Zoll, when I hook it up through people on scene and do a 12 lead and send it off to the hospital and so forth. And those things, a lot of times they didn't work. I had to be able to read through the, the static and all the false negatives and false positives and so forth, and make sure that the batteries were connected or charged and everything else. And that's with a $40,000 piece of equipment. I
Mm.
don't expect that we've come down to the point where a simple watch can accurately detect a pulse. anytime soon. I do believe that will change though with better batteries and better technology. And but in the meantime, we have to have a stopgap. And if nobody's notifying you that there is an emergency, what does all of the standby even matter if they're sitting at home
Right.
and not aware? So I mean, simple things like this simple app, or let's go back even the simple things like wearing the bracelet, wearing the necklace. A lot of people don't wear these things. Another thing is a wallet ID cards. I've got on my refrigerator. It's called the File of Life. A lot of paramedic and fire services, ambulance services, they have a sticker you put on the door of your house, and that knows to go look. That tells the firefighter or police officer to go check the refrigerator, and then all your emergency information's in there. You can easily put your Cryonics information. You can do the same thing with your car and put the sticker on your bumper and put the information in your glove box. And it's just paper and magnets. Simple technology, but it's huge when you can't speak for yourself. Early notification is huge, and it's just another part of the keep it simple and stupid and easy and not too many working parts or moving parts for things to go wrong.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a good idea having the documents in the fridge and the car, as you said. That's something, the first place people will look. I guess it's kind of like the old TV ads for people who fall, the falling detection device, help I've fallen, I can't get up, except help I've died and I can't revive myself. So get here
Yeah,
as quickly as
and see
possible.
now the difference also with that is you have to actively push it. Help, I'm falling. So this is set for a
Mm,
timer, right? And that timer will go off and check, and you have to actively shut it off. So it's the opposite of you have to actively send the alert.
mm.
It's going to check on you, and if you don't respond, then it's an alert,
It'll
and
start
it
escalating.
works.
Yeah.
And I guess we only did that in Android. We didn't we initially set out to write that whole app, and we got quoted prices in the thousands of dollars, 30, 40, $50,000. Well,
Wow.
someone already built the app, and we just asked for permissions to layer some of our stuff on top of the app, and we got the Android version done for a couple $1,000s. And we got some volunteers, Nikki Olson and Lauren and a few other people, and they helped apply that to the Apple I/O version. So now anyone with a smartphone for free, we're giving this out for free, should be able to at least have one layer of emergency protection. And I wish more cryonicists would use it. It's free. You know, who cares who developed it, or
Yeah.
how technical it is or how technical it isn't. It's something to use one more layer of redundancy in your toolbox.
Especially if you know you're at risk, if you know you have heart disease or something else that could kill you suddenly, then
Or if you're
absolutely
going to
that's a
be alone, I'm
yeah.
alone up north right now in my cabin, and you know, if I got a lot of friends coming by constantly checking on me, um, just because I'm a sociable sort of guy. But you know, I don't have my alarms turned on when I'm around people. But when I know I'm going to be alone, I turn the alarm on. Why not?
Mhm. Yeah, as you sort of, I think you sort of hinted, one of the big issues with developing a really good device like a really good watch app is the problem of false positives. If you're getting 10 false positives a day, you're just going to be completely overwhelmed. So that's going to be a real challenge. Maybe better hardware, maybe artificial intelligence that can tell you've just taken the watch off. It's not that your heart's actually stopped. So I think we're getting pretty close to having a system like that. But we've been talking about it for years, and I think for now, as
It's
you
always
say,
5 years away, right?
yeah,
Always five
yeah.
years.
But I think, as you say, it's a good approach to use what works today, what's simple, and we can always build on that later. But it's much better than having nothing. Even with like the one Alcor uses, it just checks on you, I think, twice a day, or maybe it's once a day. But at least that means, on average, you won't be
And
sitting
I
there
use that one
for
too.
12 hours. Yeah, okay,
I
good.
use the Elcor one as well. I use both.
Great. So let's going back to a little bit of about you and CI. So, what would you say are your biggest achievements or things you feel happy about since you became president?
Well, as soon as I got there, I helped definitely clean up and redo the facilities. I don't know if you've seen CI lately compared to what it used
Not
to
for
look
about
like.
10, not for about 10 years, 10 or 11
Yeah,
years.
like I think the first time you or the last time you were there is when I first became the president,
Hmm.
and it was let's say it lacked a lot in both appearance and operations. So I helped fix up the website. I helped fix up the building, the facilities, and the operations. And we had some personnel issues. I helped iron all that stuff out. All of that was just basic low hanging fruit. But then I think the thing that I've been doing more than anything is pushing standby, standby, standby. It's just so critical and so important because all you got to do is look at the case records or case reports for all organizations. If you have standby, if you have early notification, if you have some simple planning, you're going to have a much better chance of success than if you just kind of hope for the best.
So I guess sort of return to something we talked about a little bit earlier. Having more money obviously allows you more safety in some sense. Now, especially important, of course, is for patients who can't do anything themselves. Once they've made their arrangements, made their funding, there's nothing more they can do. So it seems particularly important to manage those patient care funds for the long term. So how much does Cryonics Institute set aside for each patient for long-term maintenance? Is any of that intended for revival and reintegration, or is that expected to be entirely separate? And how is that money invested as well?
Sure. The answer is none and all. So we don't really set aside money in separate accounts or anything like that. It's all operational, but everything, our primary main focus is maintaining patients. But once it becomes possible to revive patients, all of our assets, all of our equipment, all of our money that's been cooking away in the banks, funded and growing, compounding interest over the years, it's all the mission's going to switch to revival, and then if there's anything left over, that's all going to switch to reintegration into society. So some people say, well, but what happens if you have to spend the money on maintaining the patients that you needed for revival? Or I'd argue that if you're going to run out of money for maintaining the patients, revival is not going to matter, and neither is reintegration. So we need the flexibility to shift that money around as fast as we need to, um, and and pay for what needs to be paid for. If we need to raise prices, we need to raise prices. If we need to um, get more money in our coffers, we need to get more money. It's more of an issue of how much money we have than how it's parsed out or separated into different funds. At least that's how we look at it at CI.
So CI doesn't have anything like a patient care trust fund that Alcor and Tomorrow Biostasis have. One advantage is
No,
having.
we do encourage our members, if they want to set up trusts. We put templates out there, like a trust template. If they don't feel that we're putting away enough, if they think we're too cheap, well, there's two things you can do. You can donate more money to us, and we allow for that, and help bring the whole organization along. Or you could set some money aside in a dynasty trust that we've templated out. You have to obviously got to use your own attorney in your own location, and you can set some money aside for that specifically for you, and you could earmark the money in a, some people call it selfish, but in a way for yourself. So there's two ways. The socialized way, I guess, is just to donate more money to the organization. And that's what we are. We're kind of an a la carte organization. Standby for one person might work. SA might be great option for someone living in Florida or California, where SA headquarters, or ICE, or Cryonics UK might be a great place if you live in the right part of England. It might not do you too much good if you're maybe in Canada or something like that, in which case you better set up your own local standby. You better have a different group. We had a group in Minnesota set up their own standby. Fantastic standby for a local standby. Um, and they've really made a difference on at least three patients. So, all of these things we try to be a la carte. We try to allow as many choices, free market choices. And so if you want more money, if you want to give more money, then pay us more money. It's that simple. If you want to set aside more money, go ahead, set aside a trust. Um, but we also don't want to price ourselves out of. We don't want to lose a life because someone can't afford it. So we're trying to have. It's a real duality of trying to have the most affordable price we can do to make this happen, to make it work, without pricing people completely out of the project. If that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why people in the organizations like having a patient care trust fund. One is that you never know what future management might be like. So you've done a great job as a previous CI president of keeping costs low. But what if someone comes in and starts spending a lot more money, and then it's draining funds that you actually need for patients in the future? Having a trust fund kind of makes that impossible because it's very hard to take the money out of it. And the other thing really is in case there's a legal attack, which we've seen a few of those. But if the government really turned on cryonics and tried to shut it down, at least the way that the two existing funds have been designed, they could carry on, at least maintain the patient, so long as that wasn't banned as well, because they would have a separate set of funds which actually legally is distinct from the main cryonics organization. So it's difficult to set up. It takes a lot of work. It has some expense, but there's that upside. So I guess you have
Well,
to sort of
and
choose your own trade-off.
I'm not entirely against it. I've also I've often argued that one thing that Cryonics is lacking is a real solid um, vertical integration. Um, so there's a lot of things we need in Cryonics that are very specific. Um, we need key personnel that need to fit very specialized criteria. You need some knowledge of the funeral industry. You need some handyman knowledge. You need emergency medicine knowledge. Maybe some perfusionist knowledge. You need kind of this really nice mix, and you need a loyal, dedicated, hardworking person at the same time. So, key personnel is one thing that we need a pool to draw from. How about cryostats? There's only a couple people that I know of in the United States that make cryostats. And what if they stopped making them? You know, what? Uh, Maybe we should get in the business of making cryostats, not for cryonics, but maybe for hospitals or research centers, but also have the capability to make these larger ones
Mm-hmm.
for cryonics. And same thing, maybe we should be involved with hospice. Maybe we should be involved with ambulance companies. Instead of a dedicated standby company, an ambulance company that is constantly rotating its equipment and personnel to get them trained, but also they have this 5% capability. Their main job is regular traditional emergency medicine, but maybe their side job is standby. Uh, a so like the main job of the people who are building the cryostats, they're building smaller cryostats that aren't going to be used for cryonics, and that's their main sales and their marketing and their whole business model. But they also have, and then maybe overseeing that is a trust or a organization that takes some of the money and keeps those that vertical integration alive, but
Mm-hmm.
also feeds back into the Cryonics organizations and helps them out. So yeah, I could see different legal entities set up, different trusts. We kind of in a way do that for research, but I'd like to see that in a whole bunch of other fields as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the group of non-profits that I work for, funded by BRLS, basically Bill Falloon these days, is actually trying to do something like that, where you have an actual mainstream medical business, emergency medicine, maybe an ambulance business, which you can then obviously draw on when needed. So hopefully that'll
Right.
succeed. I'm curious, maybe you don't want to answer this question, but I kind of assume that CIA made those cryostats directly. They're not the stainless steel ones that Alcoa and others use, which you got us all who makes cryogenic viewers. Who actually makes those for you, if you're able to say that?
Well, we have several organizations that start them for us, and then we finish the process. We paint them, we insulate them, and we draw down the vacuums and add some vacuum equipment. But we want to expand out into um, doing it both ways, uh, continuing with the carbon fiber tanks, but also possibly working ourselves into the stainless steel because we want more diversity of suppliers. We'd like to have, it's just like the same thing what we do with our liquid nitrogen. We've got three suppliers, not because we need three, but because we want to make sure that there's no one monopolizing, and also we want layers of redundancy in case one tries to either go out of business or raise our prices drastically. We like
So
to have at
do you
least
take
three.
deliveries? Do you take deliveries from all three, or just keep them sort of on
We
retainer,
take
so to speak?
deliveries mainly from the one that gives us the best price, but we also rotate and still take deliveries from
Hmm.
the other two just to keep that window open or keep that door open. And we do the same thing with cryostats as well. And that's why we might expand into the stainless steel cryostats as well.
Yeah, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on those costs. I'm sure you do. And when I started at Alcor as
Not
president,
just costs, but supply chains.
yeah,
After COVID, there was a lot of
yeah,
supply chain issues.
yeah. But when I took over in 2011, I looked at the liquid nitrogen bills and realized that, oh my goodness, what happened? We're paying like 40, 50% more than we were not long ago. And so I went in and renegotiated, and I think we switched suppliers and saved like 40% right away. So someone hadn't been paying attention to the bills apparently, and they tend to usually in the contracts they actually say we can increase by X% per year, and they will tend to do that unless you kind of push back a little bit. So yeah, it's good to have multiple suppliers. You're automatically putting some competition on them that way.
Right, it gives you leverage to negotiate as well.
Yeah, yeah. And another advantage, I guess, you have there in terms of costs is the Detroit area. Pretty much everything is less expensive, right? So they have to deliver liquid nitrogen for various industries, so you probably get it really cheap. Plus, you have a very large bulk tank behind the building, which means you can store quite a lot of it, which is very good to have.
Yeah, we take advantage of whatever we can,
Yeah.
for the benefit of our members.
So one question I have here is, and this is not a fun topic, but legal challenges happen every so often, and I don't know CI's background. I hear we never had a legal. We don't know from the inside, from the outside, what CI might have had to do. But I know that Alcor's had some major lawsuits, including one a few years ago, which was ridiculously expensive. Actually, I tried to argue for a lower cost approach, but I was kind of swept aside and ended up spending a lot of money on that. What happens if CI does get sued by relatives or somebody? Do you have the funds to pay those expenses, and what would your strategy be?
So we do have the funds, and it's kind of an all or nothing, just like our funding for operations and maintenance, and how all of it's going to go to that. And then after that, if we did face a legal challenge that we had to defend against, we do what we had to do. But what we try to do is we try to get ahead of lawsuits, way ahead of them. We're kind of a legal heavy organization. We've got 3 lawyers on staff, on our board of directors, not on staff, but on the board of directors.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to afford that. Um,
But
but
Alcor has the same thing. Alcor, I think, has more attorneys than anything else on the board right now,
right,
plus
right.
plus the CEO. Yeah.
But we try to take a really strong defensive approach, and in putting the carrots and sticks in such a place as to avoid the lawsuits in the first place. So you say, why would someone want to sue CI? Well, one reason is money, right? It's the family wants the money. They don't want their loved one to be frozen.
Uh-huh.
And so they figure, and I made this mistake. When I first signed up, we have an option that says, if you don't get suspended, what do you want us to do with the money? And I said, well, give it back to my family. If the services aren't rendered,
Yeah.
why would I want the why would I pay for services not rendered? And I even thought, well, maybe that'll motivate the organization to work a little harder and get me frozen if they get paid. Well, they're not a for-profit. It's not like Max is going to get richer if I get frozen or not. It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, because we care about one another, but it really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. You're putting the carrot in the wrong place. You're telling your family, hey, if we bury this guy, you're going to get paid, and if we don't bury him, you're going to lose 28,000 or 35,000 or whatever I've allocated out to CI. What I encourage people to do is the opposite of that, and I've done it myself. And I've gone a step further, and I've told my family, I'll tell you what, if you guys suspend me, yeah, you won't get that 35,000, but you'll get all of these other assets. You'll get a couple million here and a couple million here for this and that. But if you don't suspend me, if you actively stand in the way, if you legally go after CI, you're going to get $1, and you're going to be disinherited. Why? Why is that? My wife goes, why would you do that? And I said, it doesn't apply to you because you're going to freeze me, right? You're going to get me suspended. It doesn't apply. She goes, well, of course. So I said, it doesn't apply. I'm kind of trying to set the example for others. And I'm saying,
Yeah.
why $1? So that you can't say I didn't forget you. I'm actually putting a huge stick out there and a huge carrot out there, and I'm putting them in the right places. And I'm encouraging very hard for people to do the same, because that's the kind of stuff, if you put that stuff in writing and you let your family know and you get lawyers involved ahead of time, then you're much, much harder to sue, much less likely to get sued. So
Yeah.
this is an approach we take, and it's not just from a patient to facility type of thing. It's we take this whole defensive approach serious throughout everything we do. And I'll give you an example. I think that, for instance, in British Columbia, I think there was a law that said you could not market cryonics
Hmm. That's right.
actively, and it was kind of an offensive law to us cryonicists. And luckily, we went after them. Not us, but other cryonicists went after them, and they got rid of that terrible law. But our legal team looked at that and said, "Why would you even touch that? Why would you open that Pandora's box?" So the question was, can we get patients out of BC? Yeah, we actually did get people before and after that law was enacted. So we had no problem getting people out. So what couldn't we do? Well, we couldn't advertise. We couldn't take out an ad in the newspaper. We couldn't put up a roadside that said, dial 1-800 Cryonics or whatever. But we didn't really advertise that way anyhow. We advertise over the internet. So
Hmm.
um, I guess one of our legal experts' thoughts was, you open that box, you kind of you could actually have things go the other direction for you, where they said, you know what, not only are we not going to let you advertise, you lose. Now you can't even get patients out, because now you anything can happen with lawsuits.
Yeah.
David Ettinger used to say, you know what, us cryonicists we're all the organizations are one lawsuit away from being regulated right out of existence. So I don't want to be a coward, but you know what? That scares me. That scares the heck out of me. Let's
Yeah.
avoid those rattlesnakes. We're kind of a minority, and we don't need to pick fights. So
Yeah. I
we're
think that.
extremely defensive. Extremely.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. I think in British Columbia, I think as you said, the law was you can't advertise crowns. It's not that you can't actually do it, but the fact that it's in Canada doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't affect us. A couple of examples. One that actually applied at Alcohol with when we redid our website. Someone at some authority in Canada complained about some wording, and I was made to change that, even though this is Canada. So it's kind of bizarre. And actually, another example that's very current right now, of course, is some top European Union official is basically calling for Elon Musk to be arrested because he's not sufficiently censoring people in Europe. So if they can do that, from Europe to America, it shows that the national boundaries don't necessarily help. Uh,
Yeah,
and
you can be sued in America for looking at someone cross when they cross the street.
yeah, yeah, we got
You
to.
can bully people. It's terrible. We
Yeah,
need tort
it's terrible.
reform.
We do. I very much agree with that. I think we need loser pays or something like that. Yeah, and it's not just relatives, greedy relatives, which are very much a thing. It's kind of distressing actually how common that is. As soon as someone's gone, especially if the person's not a cryonicist, if the family are not cryonicists, they will do that. But it's not always about that big lawsuit case we had. I think the problem was that was a big part of the problem, but it was the person who started the lawsuit was just crazy. I mean, really crazy and around the bend. Uh, and hated his father and wanted him to destroy him no matter what, and to destroy anybody who was helping him. So with that kind of
So
person, reason
I
isn't
don't.
really possible.
Yeah, that person. In no way do I blame Elcor for that lawsuit, but I do have to say, is there something that maybe the patient could have done to set things up to disincentivize his son to go as
Yes,
crazy as he did?
yes,
Do you
he
think
could have
so?
done
I
that.
think there is. I think so. So the onus is kind of on the members and patients to set things up ahead of time with the carrots and sticks in the right place, and the onus is on us to encourage those members and patients. They better do that. And
Yeah,
if we can do our job, we'll get way ahead of the lawsuits before they actually happen.
yeah. Well, if he had a disinheriting clause in there, actually, he didn't want one of his sons to have anything much that's the one that caused all the trouble because they did not get on at all. But it was worse than that. Even though it turned out that this guy was worth over $10 billion, he was perpetually behind on his dues and underfunded for cryopreservation. So we didn't know if it was somebody had that kind of money. So it's kind of ridiculous. Someone who could easily afford to do that, just not taking care of things, not putting the disinheriting clause in there. Those are quite powerful things, I think. If especially if they know of it ahead of time, you want to make sure they they know that there's no point starting a lawsuit because you're going to lose.
And
Yeah,
we learned from Alcor. We watched what happened, and then we started posting a lot of stuff on our websites to say, hey, you know what? You might want to have this disinheritance clause because this is what can happen.
yeah. I think also some of Alco's lawsuits have benefited cryonics in general, especially in California, where actually there's a written um, guarantee that you have the right to do cryonics now because of the 1980s and early 90s battles with the health department and the coroner and so on. Okay, let's move on to, I think, a really important area, which is research. I'm a big fan of research in this area and been writing about it on the blog and pushed it while I was at Alcor. What kind of research has CI done itself or funded in recent years that you might want to let people know about?
Well, some of our research has been a little bit under the table as far as we've worked with PhDs who are involved with the Society of Cryobiology. We were working with them early on when the law or their bylaws said you can't even associate with us in cryonics. And I think that's actually another one of my achievements that I'm pretty proud of. I was able to kind of reach out and start funding some of those people in a way that warmed them up, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
to cryonics. And you see that those bylaws are gone, and uh, we've got a whole kind of also it's some of the older generation
Died
passed on and
off.
younger
Yeah.
generation, right? And science kind of advances that way too. But uh, you know, those are some of the things we've done. We're always looking at improving formulas, reducing toxicity, making sure that the perfusion works better, and so forth. But I'd have to say that I'm not quite I'm not quite as excited about um, putting too much into research as others are because I believe, and I believe this in my heart, I don't think that the, most of the technology that's going to provide for better suspensions and is going to provide for revival is going to come from the cryonics movement. I think these things are going to come from computer chip industries, maybe developing nanotechnology to put more transistors on a chip, or the pharmaceutical companies, AI, artificial intelligence, genetics, CRISPR, Cas9, all these other different technologies where there's a huge amount of funding pouring into those. I think the um, the runoff from that research is what's going to drive the real success and progress in cryonics. I don't think we have the money in the budget to put forth to make real changes. I just don't. And that's maybe just a personal thing. I don't see us making too many changes in that research area. I don't think we should not dip our toes in there. I think we should be involved and always looking to see what changes there are. But I think the things that'll help with our right now real time changes are going to be technologies that involve organ preservation. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's a formula tweak or a process tweak in organ preservation, that should have a quick bleed over to cryonics, whole body suspension. But all the rest of the revival and that kind of stuff, actually being able to wake people up, that's going to come multi-billion-dollar, multinational companies, whether we like it or not, or whether we're involved or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that you have to make a clear distinction between repair and revival technologies, which are obviously some time off, and improving the process today. So things you can
Right.
fund today, which I think you already said you're interested in doing, is improving the cryoprotectants, having it effective but less toxic.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a renewed interest in doing that. I think you've been using VM1 for a while, Apple's been using M22. But there are definitely possibilities that those could improve, and there are more people working on that today. So that's one area. Another area that would be, going back to the CT scans kind of idea, the more evidence that we can provide that we're actually preserving things in good shape, the more likely we are to get scientific acceptance at some point. So if we can bring back, one interesting idea right now is to take a lump of brain tissue and train it to do a task like flying a flight simulator. They've actually managed to do that. Or even a simpler task like playing Pong, for instance. You can actually train a bunch of neurons to play Pong. So if you could actually train a whole set of neurons to perform tasks, cryopreserve it, rewarm it, and show that it can still do the same function, you've basically proved that memory has survived through that. So I think that kind of research is very valuable, not necessarily for helping patients directly, but by hopefully bringing scientists closer to our side and getting that out into the public. So those kind of areas are probably where we put our funds. I do agree that pretty much all the revival stuff, at least for the next few decades, is going to come from other people doing organ growing, tissue regeneration, life extension work, rejuvenation in that area. Many other areas which are going to have a strong incentive. People who need limbs regrown obviously would benefit us very much. So I agree with that the revival part, we probably don't want to spend too much on that right now, although I believe that the focus of BRLS, which is funds so many organizations, is actually going to be focused on that area. So I'll be curious to see how they spend that money.
And I'm glad people like you guys are out there doing that and trying to push for different techniques and real time changes like that we can make now to better the conditions for our patients. If there's real things we can do now, that's what I'm interested in. Sometimes I'm not as interested in putting money towards just the general science, but something that actually brings about actionable results, like real time actionable results. And I'm glad that you guys are doing that. And that's what that if we do put money into research, those are the types of things that we put our money into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one particularly interesting area was a couple of interesting things. Whole body transport on liquid nitrogen is something that's been discussed recently, which basically buys you a lot more time than dry ice. And dry ice is at a rather unfortunate temperature for recrystallization, which liquid nitrogen avoids. And the other thing I think is particularly interesting is this idea of vitrofixation, the combination of cryopreservation with chemical fixation. And it seems that if there are cases where you're going to have a certain amount of ischemia, that might be the best way to go. Whereas if someone's right at the bedside, you won't need to do that. You can just do a good perfusion. So yeah, there's some interesting new opportunities coming out that this group of nonprofit companies is working on.
What's another one is intermediate temperature storage.
Right. Yeah.
That's another one. All interesting stuff. But I have to always say, I call those the higher end fruit or the higher fruit. How many people are just getting warm ischemia because they have like nothing set up for standby, or because they won't wear their bracelet or their necklace because they don't like the way it looks or something like that. It's these lower end fruit that have such a drastic result in warm ischemia. I mean, I think that you can get a hell of a good suspension with today's technology if our members focused on some of these simpler things. So, the old acronym, keep it simple, stupid. When I worked in emergency medicine, we were going through a lot of phases of changing the joules on the defibrillators, changing the drugs, cardiac drugs. We had all kinds of devices. We'd hook up advanced airways with negative pressure valves and so forth. And you know what it came down to? Better quality CPR, deeper compressions, more change outs between people. The most simple stuff that had been developed in the 50 years prior was the stuff that really, really made a difference. When we looked at the numbers, it wasn't these, whether we give amiodarone in a cardiac arrest or atropine. We actually stopped doing a lot of these drugs and simplified our drug protocols and algorithms, and went back to the basics and went back to the simple stuff. I know it's not as pretty, it's not as cool, but you know what? If it's making results, and so I'm always glad that we're doing all these other things like tweaking the formulas to make them better, reduce a little toxicity, and using CT scans and using intermediate temperature storage and all this. I'm glad for it. I'm very grateful, but I just wish that more cryonicists in all the organizations would focus more on local standby, focus more on the basics. And really, I really want to drive that home, because the difference between having it and not having it is, as you know, the difference between a good suspension and a bad suspension.
Right. So if you're actually the CEO of, say, Boeing, you'd be telling your people, well, let's stop our planes from crashing and stop the wings falling off before we try to fly faster.
Right, right.
But yeah,
Or,
so
or
both are important.
before we're not worrying about Wi-Fi, in the seats, so that people
Yeah,
aren't as bored during their flights.
yeah. No, I agree. There's a lot of room for improvement there, and as I think you sort of suggested a couple of times, it's not just the Cryonics organization's responsibility; it is the members as well. This is, rolling this together.
Yeah.
It can make a lot of difference what you do personally, where you live, who you've told about your arrangements, what kind of contracts you have, the kind of things we've talked about. There's a lot of room for improvement there. So yeah, I think they shouldn't be mutually exclusive, certainly. Uh, Let me ask. I know CI has quite a few members outside the USA. What do you do for standby outside the USA? I believe that you've used Tim Gibson in England and Cryonics UK in Britain, but outside that area, do you have any arrangements for standby?
That's a fascinating example, and that's the example we use quite often. Set up your own local standby groups, whether you're in the United States or whether you're overseas. I'd argue it's even more important overseas because of the distances involved and the logistics
Mm,
are it's so much harder to get a body from different locations all the way to the United States. One encouraging fact is that there's cryonics organizations opening up on every continent. I think Australia just had their first successful
mm-hmm,
cryopreservation, and when I talked to Peter about setting up the facility, I was trying to drive home, set up standby first, set up standby, not because it's just going to help CI members get the CI from Australia, but also because Australia is a big continent. Just to
yeah.
get the people from Australia to the Australian facility, so standby, standby, standby. And if you don't have standby, don't complain about it. Don't whine to your Cryonics provider about it. Set it up yourself. Start
Mm,
and set it up yourself. And I know that sounds kind of like a daunting task, but uh, if you don't know CPR, go to school, get certified. How hard is it to get certified? That's a pretty easy process, and you could
mm-hmm,
save a life. And Cryonics, I like to say, is a cardiac arrest code with ice and a few other chemicals, and a few other complications, obviously. But at its basic root, it's a cardiac arrest code,
mm-hmm,
and so learn that. Learn basic CPR. Learn to network with family, friends, and professionals. Some people think that they can just barge into a funeral home or a doctor's office, and I'm going to tell people what they need to do. You got to establish relationships with people.
mm-hmm,
You got to it's you got to become friends with them. I've become friends with. I meet up every 6 months. I'll bring in coffee and talk to my funeral director. I'll give them a little card with a thank you card with $50 in it, or tickets to the baseball game, so
mm-hmm.
that I'm not just this guy who comes in and annoyingly talks about cryonics
Right.
every 6 months. I'm the guy who brings donuts and coffee. I'm the guy who brings baseball tickets, or a dinner certificate for so he can take his wife out to dinner or whatever. And so I've genuinely become friends with some of these people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
a lawyer, a doctor, the medical examiners in Milwaukee. So I've made inroads, but I didn't start off with, hey, I need you to do this cryonic stuff for me. I started off with, hey, since you're a funeral home, what happens if I want my body shipped to Michigan? Um, how about can you do that? And that's something that they understand. Well, of course we could do that. And then maybe next time I ask them, what about if you did it on ice? I know you guys don't do cryonics, but could you at least put me on ice and ship me? And it's just a gradual process of
Mm-hmm.
gaining trust between people, and that's always been my approach: a gradual trust approach, uh, making friends with people, and I always believe it's you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So that's been the process, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about networking. You're going to need funeral directors no matter what, to ship a body from point A to point B, and what if funeral directors are everywhere? They're all over the world, so that network already exists. So why not kind of hijack them for your own needs and use them? I know we want to have the medical community hijack, but or not hijack, but collectively in a collaboration. But I think building those networks, building those friendships, um, I think that's something I don't know. I don't know if you can teach it or not. I think that's the most important thing we can do
I
as
think it teaches to some
clinicians.
extent. Yeah, it depends on personality. Some people just aren't going to do well at that, but I think you can certainly train for it to a certain degree with the right kind of people. And it is
Right,
very important, as you say. And that's
right.
another thing that local teams can do. Right? They don't necessarily have to do all the surgery and that thing, but it's very valuable if they go to the hospitals or the funeral directors and make some relationships ahead of time.
Yeah.
That's something they can do without a lot of medical skill.
Right, and you get a group of people, and maybe you realize, oh, this person's really great at computer programming, but maybe they're not the best at talking to people.
Maybe they're a
You
little
know,
autistic. Yeah.
right? And they might rub people the wrong way. So maybe that's not the person you're going to put out front to be
Right.
your negotiator. So
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, we're almost done here. I just want to ask this question. If you have anything to add, you certainly can. So I've been doing a lot of media, obviously, I did it for alcohol before. I know I'm doing it independently, and even before that, I was doing a lot of media. And I know you get called on to do a lot of media too. Do you have any particular approaches to getting the message across? Like, for instance, I present it as a continuation of an extension of emergency medicine, basically, and try to connect it to other things that are happening right now, like freezing embryos and so on. Are there any particular approaches that you have, or common objections that you well prepared for? Do you have a kind of a media strategy?
Oh well, it's something you do get good over time. You get they throw you zingers and bad thing. They some media is out to kind of make you look bad right from the get go, and I can kind of sense that after a while, and I can sense who's going to give us a fair shake. The truth is, I always just try to speak from the heart, right? And I speak with passion about chronics. I talk about the humanistic side of it, not always the scientific side of it. I talk about why am I doing this? It's because I love my family. I love my friends. I love life itself, and I mean, how can you argue against that? You force the interviewee into being pessimistic, and if you're constantly optimistic, I think you win people over. I think if you're eternally optimistic and you really care about what and believe in what you're talking about, and you're from the heart, I think that wins people over. You said it yourself when you said, you see some common objections, you see some real common questions, and there's easy things you can kind of throw out there. It's an ambulance ride for the future, and I worked on an ambulance by day, and now I work by an ambulance by night. It's the truth. It's the truth. I'm just speaking my personal heart, and I think that's the way to approach things. You got to know your audience. If you're talking to left wing or right wing group, you got to kind of tailor your discussions. Atheists versus fundamentalists.
Mm.
I've with fundamentalists, I've quoted the Bible off of something that I read on an Elcor website, Matthew 10:8, knowing healing the sick and raising the dead, or something like
Hmm.
that.
Go
Um,
forth and do as I have done. Yes.
right. Whereas, if I'm talking to an agnostic or atheist group, I certainly wouldn't bring that up. I might bring up other things like, well, if there is no afterlife, this is your only chance to extend your life.
Hmm.
So either way, you win. And ultimately, with a heart transplant, you don't ask someone if they're fundamentalist, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or agnostic. You just do your best to save that person's life because it's a
Hmm.
good human thing to do. And that's how I like to approach chronics. I answer things tailored on the people I'm talking to, and I'm from the heart, and I believe deeply in chronics. And boy, it's hard. If I can't convince my mother and father,
Mm.
it's not always easy, but I have to keep trying because it's something I believe in.
Yeah. One thing I like to do sometimes is to turn the question around. So if the reporter says, "Well, why do you want to live?" I say, "Well, why would you not want to live? Why do you choose to live this morning rather than killing yourself? Why should the fact that your body gives out at a certain point mean you just give up?" So often turning things around like that, or asking people if they say, "Well, it's just wrong, it's unnatural to live any longer than we do." Well, Should we live? Because they say, oh, it drains life of all meaning and purpose. Well, should we shorten people's lifespans? Will they become more meaningful? Why is it that the current life expectancy is perfect? So yeah, sort of dig into people's assumptions, asking a lot of questions, and as you say, very importantly, knowing your audience. That's something you really only get good at by doing it over and over again. So yeah, I've talked to groups of attorneys and actually the Scottsdale Violent Crimes Unit actually came in and toured alcohol. They were very friendly. I talked to them differently than I would a group of doctors or nurses or students. So yeah, it is really a skill that develops over time. I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength, it sounds like, in the way we talk about cryonics. Well, that's actually all my questions. Is there anything else you'd particularly like people to know about CI, its current plans, the future? Well, we covered pretty much everything.
I'd say, check us out, check our website out, cryonics.org, and take a look at us. And, maybe we're the organization that best suits you. But in any event, don't procrastinate. Even I procrastinated. It took me many years before I signed up. And, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Gives you peace of mind to know that you're signed up for Chronics. And then just know that it doesn't stop there. Then you have to start building your standby and get involved if you want to make Chronics better for all of us.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dennis. Appreciate you coming on and telling us about CI. Hope to see you around for many more years, and hopefully the next conference we can get together again. So, yeah, my very best wishes for CI's future. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me.